Good evening. Today is July 2nd, 2024. My name is Atimaneta George. I'm a Green Fellow with the American Folklife Center of the Library of Congress. And this evening I have the pleasure of interviewing Daphne Titus. Welcome, Daphne.
I'm honored to be here, team.
Daphne, I'd like to begin by asking you to share your origin story with us.
Wow. Well, I think I have a different origin story than many Foreign Service officers. My origin story is that I was an invalid child. I had very, very serious asthma. And so I spent a lot of time inside when my friends and relatives were outside playing. And what I did was look at travel magazines and watch National Geographic. And always said to myself that if I was able to get better and I was able to travel, people would not see me ever because I've spent literally 15, 20 years cooped up. And if I could get out, I would make it my job to see the world. And I was able to survive. And so I've made it my job to see the world.
Fascinating. Where did you grow up and where were you educated?
I grew up in Los Angeles, California. I was one of the last that went to public schools in Los Angeles when they were excellent, because in the 70s they had a proposition called Proposition 21, which removed most of the funding that had been going to public schools. And after that, public education had been decreasing in quality geometrically. However, when I went, we had an excellent education. We had field trips, we had music teachers, we went to plays and concerts and other things at the music center in downtown LA. The Dodgers were there at the time and they gave baseball tickets to good students to come to the game, and really had really had a very, very good, very, very good time. And not only that, they actually had advanced placement program in the public schools. So I took several advanced placement classes when I was in high school, so was able to pass out of a large number of classes when I went to university.
What university did you attend and what was your major?
Ah, now that's another interesting thing. I went to UC Berkeley, and I went to Berkeley when it was Berkeley with a capital B, just exactly the place your parents didn't want your daughter to go to. And in fact, my parents bribed me with a new car if I would stay home and go to UCLA, but I didn't. And up till now, I have never had a new car.
Your major was?
The major was a double major. I majored in marine biology and mathematics. So I always joke now that I was STEM before there was an acronym. And marine biology, because that is how you can get your degree, by doing research on the beach. And mathematics, just because I've always had sort of an innate logic, and it was easy, and I liked it. And mathematical proofs, if you look at them, are actually quite like music. And by the time you have them all written out and all the symbols and everything is solved, it really looks like sheet music.
Are you a musician as well?
I used to be a musician, and it's very interesting because a lot of musicians are very good at math, or even actually mathematicians and vice versa, because it is essentially the same and uses the same part of your brain. And I went to the conservatory in Southern California, the University of Southern California, in addition to football, also has a very famous music conservatory for young students. And I attended that all through primary and secondary school and thought I was going to go to Juilliard. However, music, the business side of music is like the business side of sports. So when I found out, for example, the price of sponsoring a recital at Carnegie Hall to introduce yourself was close to $250,000 even back then. And the fact that so many people that I thought were at least as talented as me were working at places such as Photomat or McDonald's because they didn't have the wherewithal to have the sponsorship to get on the big stage. I decided that since I was able to be academic as well as musical, I had better go on to UC Berkeley. And so that's what I did.
Tell us how you got into international affairs.
Well, I got into international affairs because once I had been able to successfully go through university and get my first degrees, I was trying to think of what to do. Because at first I thought maybe I would be a doctor because marine biology, mathematics, I had all the classes. But my best friend at the time was was in medical school, and that is not a life. If you get through it, then you can serve the community and heal people and do that. But in the meantime, I just couldn't see 10 more years of no sleep and running around and doing all the things that medical students and residents do. And I thought of other professions, but I wasn't really interested in teaching because I had actually taught school for a couple of years at a private Jewish day school. And I taught science and mathematics. And whereas I really enjoyed children and teaching, as you know, is one of the hardest things you can do, to be always on and giving of yourself and trying to pour your knowledge into others. It's really exhausting. And I said, well, I have to find something else to do. And so I just decided that I would go to law school because that's basically the only graduate school you can go to with any preparation, and you can just take the LSAT and the legal test and see what score you get. So I took the test, I got an excellent score, got into all sorts of law schools, but decided to go to New College of California in San Francisco because it was a public interest law school like Antioch and Northeastern. And as part of the curriculum, you're required to do 1,000 hours of internship. So the course is normally 4 years, but at least in the Bay Area at that time, those graduates were very much sought after because of the 1,000 hours of internship. Firms or practitioners that hired us knew that we knew how to work and would be value added from the moment we started, as opposed to having to be trained. And since 1,000 hours is a lot, that means you have to work every summer. So the first summer, I worked in a law firm in San Francisco. When it was getting ready for the second summer, I knew I had to work, but I really wanted to travel somewhere. And I happened to be sitting, and my evidence teacher came by and asked what's wrong. And instead of saying nothing or usual response, I said what was wrong. I really want to travel this summer, but I have to get these hours. What am I going to do? And the evidence professor said, "Oh, well, I teach at this other law school that has a summer law work program in England. You should apply." So I went over and, with his help, applied for the program, got accepted, and ended up in a law firm in London. And I had the best time because a lot of their associates were tired of going up and down out of town, because in the UK, London is the capital and people go out all over the country from London to help with and do cases. And since I was the American interested in traveling, I didn't mind going to the back of beyond some rural place to go to court because it was all exciting to me. And they could always tell when I was calling in, because that was back in the day when there were still coin phones, and UK coin phones are very, very hard to deal with. And they could always tell if there was fumbling on the line, that meant that I was calling in or trying to.
What happened next?
Well, what happened next is that I enjoyed my time there so much. I went back to London and went to London School of Economics to do my LLM. And I went back to the same firm. They just hired me immediately. And while I was doing my LLM course in there, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, came through looking for a French-speaking US lawyer. And it's interesting because in the US, filling things with quotas are just anathema, but that's how everybody else does it. But what they do is they don't look very hard, or they look in places where is going to be unlikely to find what they're looking for. So they were looking, quote unquote, for French speaking American lawyer, but they were looking in London. However, the firm that I was working at was on their lists of firms to check. And so they said, oh, we happen to have one. So I managed to get hired by OECD and went off to Paris.
What year
And
was
stayed,
this, may I ask?
excuse me,
What year was this, may I ask?
this was this was 1985 or 6.
Okay. So the mid
And
80s,
mhm,
the mid 80s, yeah.
yeah. And so I stayed there and worked and had a wonderful time, but it turns out that my boss in the office was also from Southern California. So he liked me very much. And after a couple of months, this was before the French became very user friendly and all the negative stereotypes of French people were true. So after about 2.5 months, I was just very tired of French people and speaking French. And so I took myself to the American church just so that I could spend half a day hearing English and just not having to deal with it. So I walk in before the service starts, and who do I see in the first pew but my boss and what turns out to be his best friend, who was the economic minister counselor to the organization from, from the Department of State. And as I said, my boss had already liked me because I was from Southern California, but then it was like, oh, look at this lovely young woman in church by herself on Sunday. Oh, this, oh, that. And so his friend then adopted me and spent the whole time inviting me to dinners when I'd be the only person under 60, and teas and events in their rooftop Paris apartment with a garden because they have wonderful apartments in Paris. Really, really, you can't even describe how wonderful they are. And finally, it got to, let's say, what was it? Summer. It was summer 87. It was summer of 87. And I said, well, I was tired of working there and I was going to start looking for another job. And then the economic minister said, well, you shouldn't look for another job. What you should do is join the State Department because that way you can move from job to job, but you still have a stable, overarching construct and employer. And I said, and just ignore them. But later on in the summer, he and his wife conspired with my roommate, and I went to their house for some function. But he had before gotten my roommate to pack a bag, and I would usually stay and help them. And after it was over, he said, well, we'd like you to stay for the weekend, because one of the reasons I had refused to fill out the old Foreign Service application is I don't know if it was the same when you filled it out, but it was this horrible government form, and the spacing didn't match the spacing on the IBM Selectric typewriter that we had. And so you had to move the application line by line and line it up and then type on it. And I am not a typist. That's another whole story that I go into. And I just wasn't going to type it. But he said that my wife and I are here and our job this weekend is to help you fill up this application and send it off. And so that's what I did. And I took the exam in Paris and I passed and came back home to do the oral. And that's how I got in.
What year was that?
So I started November 1988, right before Thanksgiving. And
And
that was another and that was another thing. It was one of the coldest winters ever in DC because I had thought about it because I said, am I going to go from LA to DC in the winter? And I said, but then everybody told me, well, DC is really the South. It's not that cold. So it shouldn't be that bad if you go in November, but really it was just the most hellish winter ever. But I got through it.
and tell us a little bit about your first assignment.
Oh, my first assignment was another pleasure, but I learned a very valuable thing during that first assignment, which was that the department can make happen what they want to happen because they give you the list of things, and there were two jobs in Haiti. And I knew there were other people in my class who had come from Paris doing other things also who wanted to go to Haiti. But yeah, I really wanted to go to Haiti when I saw it on the list, the first Black Republic, the people who had persevered, and plus it's in the Caribbean and they have arts and crafts and culture and the beach because after going being in Washington, I was to say I can't be cold anymore. No more assignments in cold places. This is not what I can do. But I talked to my advisor and I filled out my list and said really I wanted to go to Haiti so badly, and I'd taken the French exam, done well French exam, and I kept on telling everybody I wanted to go to Haiti. And lo and behold, when my flag day came, it turned out that three of us got sent to Haiti.
Daphne, would you explain what the Flag Day is, please?
And the flag day is when you join the foreign service, there is a training class. And during the training class in the beginning, they give you a list of possible assignments, and you're supposed to them in order them. And that is what I did. And usually at the end of your training, they have what is called Flag Day. So as they announce your name and announce where you're going, you're given a small flag from the country that you're going to.
Thank you.
And I think I still have my Haitian flag somewhere, probably in a box I haven't opened.
What was the nature of the work you did in Haiti?
In Haiti, I was a consular officer, and it was very, very busy and very, very strenuous because Haiti, then as now, is a country where there are not a lot of economic opportunities. And so most people tried to better themselves by trying to go overseas to join relatives that had made it out. So we had lots and lots and lots of visa applicants, and most of them most of them were not successful. But I always tell people that yes, it's difficult to get a tourist visa, but in every country in the world, tourism is a hard economic cut because being a tourist means that you have so much money that you don't need this for food or housing or healthcare or whatever else. You can just use it for something that is not a necessity. And most people in the world are not in that position, whether it's in the US or elsewhere.
And so, as you did consular work, was it concentrated on visas, on non-immigrant visas?
I did the full spectrum of consular work. I did non immigrant visas, I did immigrant visas, the ones where people are going to the US to join family members and stay. And I did US citizen services. And that that was very, very challenging because when I was there, we had a wave of disabled, mentally ill veterans who would come to Haiti to panhandle because at the time, this was in the late 80s, early 90s, the disability pension was fairly substantial. It was between $1,500, $2,000 a month. And at the time, a round trip ticket to Haiti was about $250. And why Haiti, I don't know because they didn't go to the Dominican Republic or Jamaica or Martinique or any of the other islands, but we literally get mentally ill veterans flying to Port-au-Prince and panhandling downtown. And that was a really challenging problem because you can't force people, the US government can't force people, tie them up, put them on a plane, and get them out of the jurisdiction if they're panhandling. All it can do is to try and find relatives. And for a couple of them, we were able to find relatives who flew down and were able to collect them and fly back. But for some, they just kept on panhandling. But it was really a mental health challenge, and I had never really seen anything like that before or since.
So, as you look back on that first tour in Haiti, what were the major challenges and opportunities that you encountered?
The main challenge, the main challenge is that it was starting a very turbulent period. And in fact, I think when I was there was really the beginning of the turbulent period that it's still experiencing, because it had been relatively stable as far as living your life up up through up through the baby doc Duvalier period. But once he was deposed, there started to be a revolving door of presidents. And with each president, it became more and more unstable. And there were many riots when I was there. There was, in fact, there was a coup that was reversed when I was there, although that was during the same period that Nelson Mandela was released from jail. And at that time, there is only room for one international story pertaining to Black people at any one given time. So, of course, the story that people heard about was Nelson Mandela being freed from jail. But also during that period, there was a coup that was reversed in Haiti, and and there was one really terrible riot where they put tires around people up and down the main street. They call it necklacing, and burn people. And I remember having to go out to the big hotel area, creeping back by all the remnants of the burned tires, and people to check physically in all the tourist hotels to see if there were US citizens there. So Haiti has always been very turbulent. But the opportunity because of that was in a lot of countries where you have a very high tourist visa demand. All the visa officers do is visas and don't really get a chance to do anything else. But because Haiti sort of geometrically increased in turbulence throughout the whole time I was there, we were the group of people who actually had the language skills. So we all had opportunities to do many things other than sit and interview people.
What was next for you, Daphne?
Next, let's see, after that, I went to Cameroon because I figured I had managed to go through Haiti, and I had managed to go through Haiti, and certainly it couldn't be worse than the situation in Africa, couldn't be any worse than it was in Haiti. In a lot of ways, I was right, because Cameroon was a piece of cake after surviving Port-au-Prince. But I think that is also one of the main challenges that Haiti has when people are trying to craft logical and comprehensive approaches to help, because the vast majority of countries, when they're doing foreign relations, they split up the world geographically. And so the people working on Haiti are typically Western Hemisphere people who are not familiar with the history or the language or the culture in Haiti. And so they make decisions based on what they know about Mexico or Argentina or somewhere else in the hemisphere, but those countries have nothing to do with Haiti. But that's just an aside. So Cameroon is another place that is very, very interesting. They call it Africa in miniature, and so that's why I wanted to go there. And at the time, it was stable enough that you could travel throughout the country. They actually had a train that ran up and down the country, and they had sleeper cars, and they had enough sleeper cars that they would reserve a car on every train for women only, so there wouldn't be any issues. So I was able to travel throughout Cameroon, and I was a consular officer there, but I had an economic rotation where I really learned a lot. It was microeconomic type issues. For example, my boss would be talking about the unbearable lightness of the petroleum sector in Cameroon. And I would say, cribby like crude cost X right now, but projected to increase over the next year because the factory is falling apart. So that was very, very interesting. But I also was able to spend a year as a general services officer because I had a very dear friend at Post who was really being maltreated by the maltreated by the supervisory GSO. I think it has something to do. I think it has something to do with homophobia because the guy was gay, and so this was over 30 years ago, so people were not quite as evolved as they were. And rather than have him leave or quit the service, I said that I volunteered to switch with him and go be the junior general services officer so he could go into the economic section and stop being bullied. And that worked out shockingly well because I learned things about maintenance and housing and things like that that I've used every day of my life since then.
But Daphne, did you have any formal training to become a general services officer?
I did I did not. I did not at all. But I found it to be self-evident and didn't have any trouble didn't have any trouble with it at all. I think a lot because of my legal background and being used to looking at contracts and suppliers and things like that, and checking invoices and things like that between law and math. Those are most of the issues that you come up with in general services, and so many things are common sense. Because, for example, in countries where they have a different voltage, especially the 240 voltage, and all the outlets have switches to turn them on and off. Literally 3 times a day, somebody would call and say that my X electric appliance is not working. And the first thing to say is that, well, have you checked to make sure the outlet is turned on? And in 95% of the cases, the outlet was not turned on. So, as I said, I learned a lot during that tour, even though it was very unusual how I ended up being a DSO. Even now, even now, today, while I was traveling, some workers came to do something in our backyard, and they apparently unplugged our freezer in order to do something and didn't plug it back in. And so by the time I get back, all the food in the freezer is ruined. And since I have 2 teenagers, university students though they are, it takes me coming back Friday evening and sniffing something and going out to discover what has happened. But because of my GSO work, I know that if you have a ruined freezer or spoiled refrigerator or something, in order to save it, you need to have the hazmat people come out and do the biological clean and not just wipe it out with Lysol if you want to use it again and not just replace the appliance. So that's what's happening tomorrow. But I digress. But you never know when you're going to learn things that you will keep utilizing.
Do tell us about the rest of your career, where you served, and what the challenges and opportunities that were presented to you.
Oh, let's see. Well, after Cameroon, I was supposed to go to I was supposed to go to Somalia, but that was the period during Black Hawk Down, and they were they were evacuating foreigners, especially Westerners, from Mogadishu. Although they waited until the very last minute because I left Cameroon and I was in Washington training, and literally I had given up my apartment and was in my last class, and they sent a runner to say, do not get on the plane. So fortunately, I'd had a farewell party scheduled that night, and a friend of mine who was leaving in the morning gave me her keys so I had somewhere to live while they were working out what they were going to do. And it took them 6 weeks to decide that I would go to Nairobi because they were going to pull everybody back into Nairobi. That was a very turbulent period because not only were they bringing expats out of Mogadishu, because throughout 1994, all of the foreign embassies were closed. And in 1995, all the UN organizations came out. But also during that period,
I wanted
Sudan,
you, I'm sorry, I wanted you to define the term expat for our audience.
all the non all the non all the non-Somali all the non-Somali people were evacuated, whether they were with diplomatic missions, international organizations, international non-governmental organizations, private sector, everybody out in 1994. But the UN had stayed, but all of their personnel left in 1995. I stayed in Nairobi and supported the people. What they did is they had people flying in and out of Mogadishu and people flying in and out of Khartoum from Nairobi. And I supported those people. So that was interesting, but not exactly how or why I expected to be in Nairobi. So it remains my least favorite tour.
When you say you supported them, can you give us some more granular detail?
Well, supported them administratively, because, for example, arranged their flights, make sure that they were paid, because at that time it was usually only the United Nations that flew back and forth to countries in crisis. So if you're going to go back and forth, you would be on a UN aircraft. And so managing all that, managing their managing their supplies, because up till now there is a US compound at the airport. It's become much larger over the years, but the US mission has never gone back into town. They are in a compound on the airport in Mogadishu, so arranging for their supplies to go back and forth, their repairs, personnel rotation, all of that administrative sort of support.
Did you rely on your legal background and general services experience, or were you actually trained to take on that work that you did in Nairobi?
Oh, I once again relied on my background. I am somebody who, I joke, I'm disorganized at home, but relentlessly organized at work. So I had I had a spreadsheet and a file and computer backup for every function, and it it worked. But it helps when you are trained in logic, and that is something that a mathematics and science background really helped me with, because most people who are in diplomacy have a social science or a humanities background and not really trained in the sort of logic of what is your proof, how do you demonstrate that you're going to get from A to Z. And I had always been trained in that way, and I just applied that. So was able to show results and demonstrate results, and most importantly, justify whatever I was asking for.
How many years did you work for the mission?
I was there, I was there for, how long was I there? I was there for 2 years. Was it 2 years? Yes, 2 years. And I left and went to Washington the year of the bombing. So that was so that was actually that was very, very distressing because one of the one of the one of the casualties was my successor because the truck with the bomb went in the entrance that was under our office. So
That was
so
the
it was
19,
very hard. It just goes to show, but it really you know how random things could be, because if that had been 3 months earlier, that would have been me sitting there. And they got so many people because it was Friday. So at least in Africa, the embassies usually, thank goodness, only work half days, because especially in a place like Nairobi, where there are many places you can be by the end of the afternoon if you can be off Friday at noon. But what it meant that all morning, that area that experienced the most casualties is filled with people in line cashing their check for the weekend.
we're talking about the 1998 embassy
Yeah,
bomb.
yeah.
Very sobering. So you returned to Washington in 1998 to do what?
What did I do? I returned. I returned to work in the Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor. And I really enjoyed that. I became what I called the queen of the Western Hemisphere, in charge of all of the writings. There is the department does a human rights report every year and talks about most of the countries, and it was very interesting to take a break from Africa and focus on another area of the world that begins with A, the Americas. And I was very proud that I was able to start for the first time a human rights dialogue with the Mexican government. So for the 2 years I was there, we started what did we do? We started a human rights dialogue every quarter. They would either come to DC or we would go to Mexico City. And I love Mexico City so much, although being asthmatic, I really can only stay 3 days without turning gray due to lack of oxygen. It's really very bad. As fun as it is, as beautiful as it is not a place for people who have a respiratory challenge.
So if we look back, go to the 30,000-foot level for the Western Hemisphere, what were some of the key issues you were grappling with when you were covering issues related to democracy, human rights, and labor?
Well, one of the things we were talking is one of the things that we worked on was disability rights, because many of the countries hadn't really given individual thought to rights of people who are differently abled, and working with countries to create those constructs. As I said, the start of the human rights dialogue with Mexico, I don't know if it continued after we left, but it really marked the first time that officials from each government were talking about human rights as contained in the Declaration of Human Rights, and how they applied or were not being applied in both countries. So that was really really valuable. And we also we also worked a lot with the Consular Affairs Bureau on immigration and asylum rights of people applying for asylum at borders. It's in the news again now, but that issue is an ongoing issue, especially at especially at land borders. And I would say, even though at the news now, people are always talking about all the people that are in Mexico at the border. That is true, they're there, but there are an equal number of people in Canada at the border. And they, in large part, are getting through as they did then, because when people who are anti-immigration think about immigration, they always think of those people. And at least up till now, Canada is not among those people.
So you had that assignment in Washington. Did you elect to stay or did you go back overseas?
I went back overseas because I was lucky enough to be chosen for a deputy chief of mission job, and I went to the Gambia. And I really enjoyed the Gambia. It was a small post, and that means that you have to do everything, because you don't have a cast of thousands to become specialized in a particular realm. And it was really a wonderful place. And for once, I was lucky in that, even though the president the president had actually lots of mental health issues, and his behavior and ability to govern suffered in subsequent years. I was there during a period where he was taking his medication, and he was charming as he could be, and focused on and still focused at that moment on bettering the country. So we had a lot, of interaction, because the Gambia is where I was during 9/11. And I was very lucky. I arrived in of August of 2001. And since it was a small country, I had the chance to call on everybody who is anybody, because there are not that many of them. And I had, thank goodness, been around to see everybody, and especially the chief imam. And he was so he was so funny because he asked all these impertinent questions, but he probably just forgot, since I was such a novel experience for him, that one of the many, many, many skills that Black women have is how to manage cranky, crotchety, little old Black men. So I let him ask his impertinent questions, and then I turned around and asked all of my questions. And we ended on a very, very good note, so much so that when 9/11 happened and I called the government and asked for help, literally 10 minutes after I had called the government, they didn't send help. It was the chief imam of the Gambia who sent Muslim youth to our embassy, and they stood with arms akimbo surrounding our embassy in 8-hour shifts for a week. So our embassy was one of the few in West Africa that did not have to close during 9/11. And that was because, I didn't delay. I did not delay in making my calls. And I know how to deal with crotchety old Black men.
In the national interest.
Absolutely.
Please continue.
Uh, well, and one of my most favorite events I did, because I'm not a trained PD officer, even though I did actually get the PD training,
Public diplomacy.
public diplomacy training for once. But one of my favorite events was during Martin Luther King Day. I was able to get a recording of the I Had a Dream speech, because most people, most people nowadays have never even seen a recording, let alone were alive when it happened. And so I was able to set up a wide screen and have everybody on a terrace facing the sunset. And as the sun set, I was able to play the whole speech. That was really a seminal event. People were crying. Everybody. It was very, very emotional, and many people told me afterwards, they had never seen it, because, of course, why would they, or where would they? They don't really broadcast it on TV or streaming services or anything like that. But it was very, very powerful to think of what all those people had endured, and how much we had been able to progress, and yet how much remained to be done. But I was very, very happy I did that, because that's why we're overseas, to provide experiences that people can people can do together, because not only the Gambians and all of the people from all the other countries were there, even staff, because not one person on staff, starting with the ambassador, had ever seen that speech.
Fascinating.
So that was a good thing. That was a good thing. And then after the Gambia, I went back to I went back to the Congo for I went back to the Congo for a year.
Excuse me, I don't remember us discussing the Congo. I remember Cameroon and then, Somalia being sent over to Nairobi to support Somalia, but when were you in the Congo?
Uh,
You said
well,
back.
I was in the Congo. I was in the Congo twice.
Okay.
So when was I there first?
Was it Congo Brazzaville or Congo Kinshasa?
Oh, Kinshasa. Whenever you say Congo, it's Kinshasa.
Okay. Well, I didn't know, I just talked to someone who used the term Congo Brazzaville, and then she said, of course, at the time it was Zaire, but I stand corrected.
Yes. Well, that's because that is because that is, of course, Congo Kinshasa centric, but Congo Kinshasa is the big Congo.
Now known as the Democratic Republic of the Congo, or DROC.
Yes. And of course, backsliding, because for every qualifier added to a country's name, that means it's inversely geometrically deteriorating, because you have Congo, then you have Republic of Congo, then you have Democratic Republic of Congo, then you have People's Democratic Republic of Congo. So
Tell us about your work in the Congo.
uh, it was very, very, very interesting, because the first time I was there, it was before the wars began in the East. And so I was lucky enough that I was able to see most of Congo, because in recent years, just like people don't travel outside of Port-au-Prince or Yaoundé in Cameroon, or even Kinshasa, I was there probably at the last moment that you were really able to circulate without having major security concerns. And so I was able to see most of most of the country, and especially enjoyed going to the port Matadi, because I was in the consular section And I would usually go down to the port every trimester, every 4 months, to provide consular services to all the people on the oil rigs. So they would save up their passport applications, their requests for notarials and other services. And I would go out there and be flown out to the rig and spend all day providing their services, then fly back before dark, and then the next day go back to Kinshasa. That was really interesting. But life on an oil rig is not for everybody. They have a lot of time off for a reason, because talk about island fever. You're really stranded when you're on an oil rig.